Stanford University.
So I'm really excited to have Alexia here today. So you started out initially at LA Weekly and then also ended up joining SF Weekly, and then we all know your role at TechCrunch, which I guess TechCrunch was started in 2005 and then you joined in 2010, and it was a little bit of a pretty chaotic period since TechCrunch was acquired by AOL then, which I'll ask you a lot of questions about later, and then kind of had this rise to become editor-in-chief of TechCrunch. So excited to talk about your background today, as well as a little bit about the role of media and tech, and we'll get started. So is that good?
That's great. You're going to get a lot of I don't knows about the role of media right now, because I actually think that after last week, no one really knows. But I have a little bit of background on it that might help to shape how you think about it moving forward. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. I did join TechCrunch in 2010. I joined in August and we were sold in September, so I was the last employee hired before we sold. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to join a startup, and I thought TechCrunch was really cool because it was a startup that covered startups. Mm-hmm. So when it was bought by AOL, it kind of felt like that feeling when Trump gets elected. You're like, oh no, this thing that I really love is now in the hands of this thing that I don't really love. And I was reading some of the articles published around that time, and no matter how much our leadership pitched it, we're gonna have more resources to have more tech, we're gonna have more money to build a bigger office, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. I kind of knew that it was the beginning of the end. It's like when Vine got spun off of Twitter and then they shut it down, and the founder was like, don't sell your company. If you're not willing to see your company or your vision get degraded at least a little bit, don't sell your company. That's the truth. Because even though TechCrunch survived, and I think it's still very necessary and amazing, it'll never be what it was with Michael Arrington as the head. Even when I was the head, it wasn't close to what it was when he was the head. So
a reporter joining and then 2 years later becoming editor-in-chief, and kind of how was, and especially just the role of co-leading a publication, how was that like?
Yeah, it happened really fast. I was 29 and I was editor-in-chief of the largest tech publication on the planet. It was really fast, I was scared. But I also believed in the mission so much that I think I had this reality distortion field. So I actually thought at the time that startups were going to save the world. I don't know if I think that. And I still think they might. I think we're in a Schumpeter-esque period of short-term chaos and long-term benefit. But at the time, I'm like, oh my God, this is the antidote to 2008, where so many people were out of jobs, and this is the way we're all going to be working. And I have to make sure that TechCrunch exists because it's the way that people find out about all these cool things going on. And so because of that, it was almost like a religion. If you're religious, you go out and fight because that's what God tells you to do. Well, I thought I have to keep TechCrunch afloat because this is what's going to save our economy, and this is what's going to make young people create crazy, amazing inventions that make human life a little bit easier. So in that sense, I didn't really feel like, oh, this is too fast. I just felt, all right, this is what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. I understand this. I remember how Mike Arrington looked at it. I look at it in a different way because I'm not a 6'3" dude, but I also look at it in the same way because just like Mike, I believe that to get up and to make your own business is one of the bravest things you can do as a person. So
can we talk a little bit?
Yes and no.
So can we talk a little bit about your role at TechCrunch as editor-in-chief? So you spent some time obviously managing the site. There's TechCrunch's events, and then you were also writing at the same time. How are you placing your emphasis and focus and time and energy?
So it was a third events, and what we did for the events was pick who the speakers were. So you'd sit there in a room and you would just argue for people, right? You'd be like, but Mark Andreessen said that software is eating the world. We should have him. But oh no, we don't have enough. We don't have as much women as we need. You'd argue and argue for people, and it became kind of strange because, you could kind of see people being hot. You could see people being on the hype, where they were on the hype cycle versus how many arguments we'd have for them to come talk. And then the conferences swelled to 3 I think there are 4 now, 3 big conferences a year. So we had TechCrunch Disrupt New York, TechCrunch Disrupt Europe, and TechCrunch Disrupt San Francisco. I think we have an Asia one, we have a bunch of meetups. So events were really a large portion of our time. And we were also competing with All Things D, which is now Recode. And events are their bread and butter. No one does better events than Kara. And so if Kara is getting like Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs, we need to be on that level because that's content too. Mm-hmm. So it was a large portion of my time.
Mm-hmm. And then is there anything that you were particularly proud of during your time at TechCrunch? I know that you've spoken about the 50K Include Diversity program and a couple other initiatives.
So there's one thing I'm not proud of.
Okay, let's talk about that.
So the last year that I was there, I interviewed Peter Thiel. And I asked him questions about like Twitter. And he had just launched 0 to 1. And so I was asking him about all the things he wants to hear about. But I should have asked, like, in your opinion, what is the most evil thing you've ever done? Or like, so I'm watching that interview now, and I'm like, if only I had asked him, like, what are you doing in the background that we don't know about? Yeah. What lawsuits are you funding? Anything that was more critical than what I did ask.
Yeah, so I guess, can we talk about that briefly? I guess like jumping a little bit to, I guess, Peter Thiel's lawsuit against Gawker, and then a couple other media events, which I'll ask you in a little bit, but what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so there's some things about Gawker that were great. They completely changed the way we write on the internet and we read on the internet. They broke news and covered things in a way that challenged the kind of artificial concept of objectivity that was implemented in the 1930s as a response to yellow journalism. So they took the medium of the internet and they really applied writing to that medium. So that was amazing. And then they broke a lot of news and unveiled, like, the Clinton email server was, I think, a story that started on Gawker, but there's many. What was bad about Gawker is that in some cases they were really unnecessarily cruel and then sloppy. So it's one of those things where the good things about Gawker need to exist, and I'm sad that it's gone. And I actually think that the rest of the Gawker media sites like Gizmodo and Jezebel and Deadspin are trying to pick up the mantle of Gawker, and you can kind of see that in the way they're writing. On the other hand, I think that like what they did with that Condé Nast exec, how they outed him as gay, that kind of stuff is just pretty cruel and an invasion of people's privacy. So on the one hand, like, I think people, if they feel like their privacy has been invaded, like a sex tape of theirs is posted online, I think they should have the right to sue. I think that what happened with Peter Thiel is that he did it covertly, and he did it through Hulk Hogan and a lot of other plaintiffs, and that's just kind of shady. Mm-hmm. So it's what I call a rat's nest. Like, no one in the story is good. No one in the story is good. Mm-hmm. Everyone's culpable in some way. It's a rat's nest story. Usually a story has like a protagonist and antagonist. Mm-hmm. Everyone in the story has good things about them and bad things about them. But do I wish Gawker was still around? Yes.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, what do you think is the role of media in terms of kind of reporting on startups? Is it more to monitor these companies and really like criticize them, promote best practices, or is it really to like promote them in a PR fashion? I think like some critics of tech site might say that all technology sites are just PR sites basically. So I guess what's your opinion on that?
So there's a quote by a British publisher, Alfred Northcliffe, and it's like, news is something that someone somewhere doesn't want you to know about. Everything else is advertising. And I think that this quote is a good guiding light. It's like, if you as a reporter, as a writer, on an asymptotic curve can think about this quote as where you should be going, then great. Mm-hmm. It's impossible to get there. Like, you're not just gonna be covering negative stuff all the time. Society would collapse. You have to find something that's good in the world. But yeah, a lot of tech press is PR because the timelines of the publishing and the news cycle is so fast that it's hard to really get the funding and time you need for investigative pieces in blogging. Mm-hmm. That being said, I don't think that you should just have a funnel where press releases come in and rewrite them. I think that you should aim for actually telling a nuanced story. And so on the one hand, I think you should be really critical, have a critical eye. You shouldn't kind of believe bullshit. And then on the other hand, the extreme of this is now after Theranos publications saying things like, oh, we don't cover new companies, or needing so much proof of a company's validity before they even grace the pages of the publication. Because if you remember, Elizabeth Holmes was on the cover of Fortune 6 months ago, or a year ago, and now she's worthless according to Fortune. So they're trying to avoid this kind of situation, and they're not covering anything new. And I think that sucks, and this is why I thought TechCrunch was pretty valuable. Because if you are a new company and you have an innovative way of solving a problem, I'll give you a specific example. I know a company that is doing chat-based personal shopping, and they've been doing it for 5 years, and they have a lot of traction. And I want the company to succeed, and they're unveiling something really new and cool. And I'm not an investor. I have no skin in the game whatsoever. I just want this founder to get coverage. And she wants a mainstream publication. So I went to one, and I was like, hey, you guys, look at this startup. And they're like, we don't cover startups. I'm like, this sucks. Okay, it's not a startup, it's 5 years old. They're like, still, it needs to be proven. So you'll get into the situation, when you graduate college and you have a resume and you want to go work somewhere, and they're like, you need experience. You're going to get yourselves into this situation, and it's there's no real solution except hacking it somehow.
Yeah. And then I guess, do you think media coverage is beneficial for startups in terms of increasing their valuation, getting additional fundraising rounds, or you mentioned Theranos and how Elizabeth Holmes appeared on the cover of Fortune. Do you think that really kind of drove her business in many ways, or other examples that you can think of?
I think it's one of those it depends answers. WhatsApp had never had media coverage. Mm-hmm. There was one article about WhatsApp by TechCrunch Europe about how it got seed funding for its first round by Sequoia. And then there was it was that article, and a year later it was an article about how Facebook wanted to buy it. And then a year and a half later it was bought for $19 billion. So it's not, it's sufficient but not necessary. Yes, press will raise your valuation. If you're Magic and you're a YC company and you're out there getting article after article because you said you're going to deliver people with Tiger, you're going to get that 30 million Series A. You're just going to get it. People are social animals. We love social signals, and press is a big social signal. Again, look at macro press and what it did to our election. On the other hand, I don't think in the WhatsApp case that it's necessary. It's definitely not necessary in enterprise. Mm-hmm. One of your questions is what companies need more coverage. I think what's happening with NVIDIA and GPUs and computing is going to change the world, and I think it's one of the things we can believe in. But it's not in the TechCrunch news feed all day. People don't, it's not a sexy story.
Yeah.
It should be.
Yeah. And I guess with that in mind, I think one of the big things for TechCrunch is that reporters can actually just publish pieces without editorial approval. How did that decision process come about? And can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think it came about when TechCrunch was 10 people. And so everyone that was there was put their big boy pants on and only publish things that they really believed in. That was the culture. It was a cultural way of only publishing excellence. We were all so in awe of Arrington that we aimed for Arrington-esque stories. Now, we didn't always accomplish it because we were young, but we really tried. At this point, it's 30 or more people, including a contributors program, including freelancers, including part-time people. So I'm pretty sure, and it's not no editorial oversight. It's if you want to publish something, you can. You better have someone else read it, because there's typos, but B, you're sort of in your own head, and publishing something in your own head without any feedback, it's not the wisest way to go about anything, right? Even tweets you should have someone read. So I'm pretty sure there's still a buddy system, and there was a buddy system back in the day. But you actually did have the ability to do that, and I thought at the time it was really cool. Now, with all of this fake news floating about, I don't know, I'm beginning to believe more and more in the power of editorial oversight.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you even decide on what to write on as a reporter?
It's different for everyone. Mm-hmm. For me, it was instinct. Like, I used to have a boss at the alternative papers, so at the LA Weekly, at the Village Voice, at the SF Weekly, who's like, a good story is the story that you tell someone in a bar. Like, a good story is the story that you tell someone, like, that you're having coffee with. Like, did you hear that Google has a Internet of Things vacuum and it's plugged into the internet? They're working on the story. Like, that's a good story. The story that I wrote about Twitter working on photos. Twitter at some point didn't have photos, didn't have GIFs, didn't have videos. Someone literally said that at a restaurant. Like, I was walking in the restaurant and someone was like, "We're launching photos next week," not to me, just to their friend. I was like, "Oh, that's great," and I broke that story. So yeah, it's a gut sense. It's something that you want to tell other people, except instead of like 2 other people, you're telling 100,000. So that's my instinctual sense. I think other people are more, especially people who have gone through journalism training, other people are more strategic about it and use a framework. Yeah.
And then for the founders in the room who are looking for media coverage, looking for press, like how do you recommend a founder even get an article in TechCrunch in the first place? Is it all relationship driven? Is it, like stalk Alexia and go to a restaurant and like shout things and try to see if she hears them as well? Or
the guy at Sumley, was a 17-year-old named Nick D'Alessio, and he stalked every tech reporter. Like I have more emails from him than like my mom. He's like he stalked all of us, and not just TechCrunch, like Recode, GigaOM, VentureBeat, and he eventually got coverage, and not for me, but someone covered it, and then it got bought by Yahoo for I think 10 million around. So it's worked for some people, right? That being said, I lean on the side of don't do that, because when you, especially at the earliest stage, like when you have an article about your company, your hype is writing a check that your product might not cash, and you're inflating its expectations so high that you're kind of like borrowing trouble, right? It's much better to not court press unless there's an actual purpose for it. As a founder, as a reporter, I'll tell you something different. But as a founder, you do press because you want to recruit, or you do press because you want to raise a round. Like, you do press because there's a reason, like a function of doing press. If you're just doing press, like here's another one, Nasty Gal got all this press. If you're just doing press and doing press and doing press, you're gonna get caught in that hype cycle. So like this very smart PR person, it's not an oxymoron, this very smart PR person at Square wrote I think one of the best articles or essays about how tech journalism works. And he compared it to a clock, right? So when you're first launching your startup, it's like dawn and everything's great and rosy and people are like, this company is popular. And then you get caught up into the hype cycle, and all of a sudden you're at midnight again and you're Uber and everyone's boycotting your product and people are saying you're evil. And then you start over again and it's like redemption. But the moment you start that clock, like you can't stop that clock until it stops you. So I would err on the side of trying to stalk writers when there's an actual purpose, or if your product really is this amazing internet-enabled vacuum that's saving hours off people's lives, or like something that will help all the people in the middle of the country feel like they're relevant and useful in the future economy, then yeah, like court press. But if you are the next Yo and you just want to do it for fun, eventually the clock starts and you'll come to the end of it.
And then do you feel that sometimes reporters only want to write about things that are already written about, and that makes it extra challenging for people to find press?
Yeah, and I think that's wrong. And I have 1,000 stories of things that ended up in my inbox. Like one of them was WordLens, which is it's an iPhone app that you put, let's say you're in Italy and you want to let's say you're in Beijing and you want to know what's on your menu. You put the phone, and this was 4 years ago, you put the phone up against the menu and it translates it for you. It was really cool. And these people were, I think some of them were Spanish. They weren't, half of the company wasn't American. And it came into my inbox. I'm like, this is the future. This is science fiction. And I wrote about it. Like, no one else had written about it before. And eventually it got acquired by Google as part of Google Translate. So I think the idea that you need social proof, and it's the same with VCs, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that you need social proof to understand or feel that something's good is not the best idea. Like, the non-obvious success is what VCs are looking for. Same with press. Mm-hmm. If everyone's already written about it, you're just like one voice among 10,000. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the favorite stories you've written?
So I liked one called Keeping Up with the Normals. And it was about how when you're a techie and you're in Silicon Valley or at Stanford, you're like, oh my God, I have all these feeds. I need a product that aggregates all my feeds. or like I need a closet for all my VR headsets, or like, oh my God. Like, you have just these very niche problems. And then the article was talking about how that's not how normal people really work, and we tend to think that our problems are their problems and it's still pretty salient today. Like, instead of actually thinking like, what does the mainstream American want, or what does someone in India want? Yeah.
What about favorite people you've written about or interviewed at TechCrunch just dropped? Or
so I had to search for this because I've interviewed Mark Andreessen, who everything he says sounds so smart. He has a reality to everything he says. He once said, amazing people do amazing things. And I left that interview, I was like, wow, he's right. And I thought about it, I was like, what does that mean? Like, nothing. Some people just have that magnetism. But I had to think about this. I thought about it for a long time. My favorite person is Andrew Mason from Groupon. Because he really just seemed like an everyman caught up in this crazy success. And when he got fired and he wrote, I want to spend some more time with my family. No, I'm actually fired. Like, when he wrote this article about how he wanted to spend more time with his family, and then he's like, nope, sorry, I was actually fired as a CEO. Like, making fun of all those step down posts. But that's not why I like him. I like him because at some point after he was fired, we went for coffee, or we went for beer, and he's like, you know what? You should go around and ask founders how much of their success they attribute to luck. Because I'll bet you almost none of them are going to say a meaningful percentage. He's like, you should, and he's like, and all of it's luck. So you should look into this. And I'm like, that's amazing. It's very true, because we don't know when the next black swan event will happen. Like, a lot of this is right place, right time. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I like him the most, because he seemed to see things more clearly than everybody else, or at least with less of an ego.
Mm-hmm. So I have a couple of questions specifically around changes that's happened within media over the past, I guess, even just few months, and as you alluded to in the beginning, and also
past few days,
past few years. And one of the big ones that really kind of shifted and disrupted the tech industry was when we heard that GigaOM shut down, and this was only about a year ago. What are your thoughts on like a major tech publication in Silicon Valley like GigaOM shutting down? And why exactly did that have to happen?
So I don't think it was shut down by some like fiat of the tech news gods. Mm-hmm. I think it was shut down because they were bad at business. Like, the business side was not organized enough to make it succeed. It's like the analog of GigaOM today is the information, which is doing amazing, and they're extremely well organized. And every day I see them creating new events and publishing really kind of thought leadership on and high signal thought leadership on where the industry is going. Mm-hmm. So I don't think you can say like something in depth like GigaOM failed, so that means there's no room for in-depth reporting. Like, Information is doing an excellent job. I'm starting to see it for other verticals. There was a company in YC this year that was like information for sports. So I think GigaOM was more a victim of its own bad business practices versus like a trend of these things going away.
And then I guess what makes a information media company have, like, what are some good business practices that you saw at TechCrunch that really allows it to succeed still today?
I think a lot of revenue comes from events. I think like as the information and I guess GigaOM and anything that's an online publication is fighting, anything that comes from engagement, views, plays, is going to reward kind of bad behaviors, like the BuzzFeed watermelon rubber band. BuzzFeed wants streamed people putting rubber bands around a watermelon, and I think this thing got like 20 million views. Like, it's going to anything that's engagement, views, tweets, Facebook shares, is going to reward entertainment versus news. So I think the business practices the information specifically can implement, even though it's not my pub. I think events, I think the subscription pricing is excellent. I think everyone who needs the information will get the information. I think they shouldn't be so harsh if people log in. Like, the HBO CEO was at TechCrunch Disrupt, and he's like, I don't mind if you use your friend's login to watch HBO. I think the information shouldn't be so mad if people use other people's logins. But I think they're doing a great job. I think because they're not incentivizing on views. I think things like TechCrunch, same deal. Like, you're grappling with a broken business model of online media, and nothing that has replaced it, even though everyone knows that it's very broken. So events is crucial. It's also one way to get people offline, out in front of their, like, away from their screens and in a room and talking. And I think that might be the biggest solution to a lot of media's problems today.
And then what do you think about publications who actually allow companies to pay for coverage on their site, and, you know, they'll put some sort of disclosure like this is kind of a paid partner who's contributing thoughts, and I know Forbes, for example, does that. What are your thoughts on that as a revenue model?
The best example of that is when Atlantic published an article about how Scientology is amazing. It was like, Scientology, not so bad. And there's like, this was paid by the Church of Scientology. I think it's awful, but I'm a writer, like, at heart. I think that's awful. I think that's like, it's misleading. Old people don't understand that it's not news. Like, older people. And I'm telling you, like, just because most of us are relatively young and use the internet one way, like my mom or my grandma, they see a fake article. It's not clear to them if it's a fake article or not, or like paid for by the Church of Scientology or not. Like, it's like, these are the kind of people that would used to forward chain letters, and now they're forwarding like this dumb native content. So I hate it. But that being said, if you're a publication, you do what you need to do to survive. It's a business model that's widespread practice at this point. Like, if it's either that or die, then it's that. But it's still super bad and intellectually dishonest.
And then I guess, like, kind of older forms of media and press, it's really, the role was to be more of a watchdog, and now we're seeing kind of new media. What do you think, I guess, if you were to like summarize, or kind of your views on kind of older versus newer forms of media, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think the question was, is the press the fourth estate? And the origin of that term is actually British. It's like the House of Commons, House of Lords, and then I think the one more house. And then the fourth estate was a check for Parliament. So it was Parliament and then press. And in the US, the First Amendment has freedom of the press because of its very crucial function of keeping Parliament in check. Now, we're in a day and age, November 15th, of no one really trusting the press. So how much can it keep Parliament in check, or Trump in check, if no one trusts it? I don't know. Older media has this amazing tradition of objectivity coming from the 30s, because before the 30s it was very biased. And they have more resources, or at least more of a structure to, like with the Washington Post and how they revealed that Trump tape with the bus. They have a structure in place where a reporter can spend months on a story. I think new media doesn't have that, and I think that's pretty scary today. If you had asked me while I was editor at TechCrunch, I would have said something very different.
And then also with new media, there's kind of this rise of a number of contributors for a lot of these online publications. Like, how does a publication like TechCrunch even select who to be as a contributor? And these are just part-time people who aren't paid, and they're writing stories for the publication.
So we actually, or TechCrunch actually has, because I can't speak for TechCrunch anymore, TechCrunch actually has an amazing contributor editor who is pretty strict and will send people, we won't publish something, but we'll send people edits anyway so they can get to be better writers. So we have human editors. Facebook, with its fake news stuff, refuses to have a human editor. So the way we do it is with humans, and I think it's an AI complete problem, right? Like, AI can't do it. It needs to be a human. Needs to be someone who understands, like, someone who can give something a bullshit test. Yeah.
I guess why would you even have contributors in the first place? Is it really, or why do publications in general have contributors in the first place? Is that just to, especially in this day and age, is that because we want more news articles out, more readership, or I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's playing to the business model of more views. I think it's like cargo culting to more page views, more unique users. That's what it is. But then there's people like Luke Beatty, who ran Associated Content, which is all this. He at some point was I've had every boss. He was my boss at some point, and his big view was we needed to democratize media. We needed to give people, the voiceless, a voice. This is the bull case for contributors. We needed to give people a place to express their views, and that's why Associated Content was Associated Content. That's why the Huffington Post is the Huffington Post. I don't have that big view. I think that we have a very temporal business model, and it rewards scale, and to scale you need a lot of content.
So I guess another shift that's happening in the industry is this rise of subscription-based kind of newsletters and content, Strictly VC being one of them. I was actually just reading Strictly VC yesterday, and I know Nico, your husband, was featured in that. So I guess what's your thought on kind of like the rise of these new types of models?
I love Strictly VC. I think they cover excellent content with a lot of amazing coverage. Actually, aside from Nico being on Strictly VC, I hired Connie to work. So Connie actually works also at TechCrunch. And I hired Connie because I thought that she was doing an amazing job of tapping into the VC community. And she reminded me a lot of what Michael Arrington did back in the day. She would hold get-togethers, and she would do one-on-one interviews. And almost everyone I knew was getting the Strictly VC emails. And I thought that she was actually very critical of certain funds and certain trends, and tried to get to the meat of the story. So again, just like with the information, I think at this point, if you have a niche audience and subscription's what you want to do, subscription is the way to go. There's no reason that Strictly VC should have like the views of a BuzzFeed watermelon. There's just simply not that many people interested in like who just raised a Series B from NEA. Like no one really, people care around here, but it's not it's not necessarily like a thing that someone in Ohio is going to care about.
And then I guess what about Washington Post was acquired by Jeff Bezos, and kind of the thought of in order to even keep these publications alive, needing like wealthy benefactors to actually do that. I guess what are your thoughts on the Washington Post acquisition?
How is this different from William Randolph Hearst or like the Sulzbergers owning the New York Times? What media company other than ProPublica isn't owned by an extremely wealthy person? So I don't see, I think this is like a false dichotomy, right? Like I don't see much difference from Bezos or any other rich person that owns a media property. Yeah, there's definitely a sense of conflict, but with the Washington Post specifically, they've had such a rich history of journalism, like Watergate, like their coverage of this election. that I'm hoping it won't affect it as much as it normally does. But again, like, wealthy people own things, including newspapers.
Let's talk about this election. So obviously, the media was wrong. There were a lot of predictions that Hillary was going to win. I guess comments on the whole election and the role of media?
Or if I can add a corollary to that too, especially since, like, I love how all the hints you're doing right now, like, overall about Trump and stuff. And one thing I did have a question on, though, is role of media. You were talking about, you know, sort of artificial objectivity that has permeated current media. And what I'd love to hear is your, I guess, perspective on two sorts of camps I've seen on my Facebook feed right now. One of which is you guys need to stop just reading Huffington Post and all these things. You need to go reach out to these other more right-wing sources and see what other people are saying. And other people who are like, you know, burn the bridges.
You want to know my thoughts? Yes. All right, so back when I was a student at Stanford last year, back when I was a student at Stanford 4 months ago, these kids in my class had a project, and I thought this was the snobbiest project. It was like, find a Trump supporter. And like on the WhatsApp, they're like, guys, does anyone know a Trump supporter? We have to do a project. And like, they couldn't find one. And there were many that couldn't find them. So I went on Twitter, and I was like, if you're a Trump supporter, let me know. And I had a person that I knew, and they're like, I'm a Trump supporter. And so I hooked the people up in my class with this guy. And as the election went on, like, he kept on getting, he got like really Trump supportery, like lock her up type of stuff, or drain the swamp. And I'm like, man, the other side is really seeing, or when Hillary called them deplorables and then everyone stuck deplorable on their name, I started following more people that this guy was following and retweeting. And I'm like, oh God, like this, it's kind of bad stuff. Like, a lot of it is fake news, but some of it is not. And here's where this gets murky. I was in the Midwest 2 weeks ago, and I was in a group of people where it was like 10 people at a restaurant. And they're like, yeah, but no one's a Democrat here. And I was like, I'm a Democrat. And someone was like, I don't know about Hillary, man. Did you hear that CNN leaked the questions to her during the debates? And I'm like, that's not true. That's not true. That's like a fake story. That's from your fake sites. And then I went and Googled, and it was true. The woman who leaked the stuff, Donna Brazile, got fired from CNN. True story. So I'm in my little bubble, and even though I made an effort to follow this one Trump supporter and all of his Gamergate guys, like, I made an effort. I was trying to see the other side's point of view. Even though I made this effort, even though I consider myself relatively well-versed in media, I fell into the same trap as everybody else. And I was so biased and so, like, in my little bubble, even though I tried to break out of it, that I don't even know what's right anymore. Like, I don't know what the solution to this is. I think if I can think a story is fake and not true just because it doesn't confirm my own bias, then 100% of the world is at risk of this. And again, I think the solution is to get out in front of you, like, leave your screen, travel to some place that's not Palo Alto, and talk to a table full of Republicans, because they're going to tell you. Like, you have to kind of practice serendipity, because otherwise I'm going to be talking to you about how much Trump sucks and never hear how Hillary got leaked a question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions related to that?
I'm from Orange County, by the way, so there's a big Republican mix. I know what you're talking about.
But on the flip side, that same group of 10 Republicans, I was sitting by women, and I'm like, if you vote for Trump and he gets elected, your right to have an abortion in your state is at risk. They're like, oh, really? I was like, yeah, you should look it up, Google it. So I think after this, we're gonna enter a new era for a lot of things, and one of those things is gonna be media. And all these tech companies that are saying that they're not media companies, they're going to have to take a good look inwards, and because they have the technology to control this. Zuck thinks that he can cure all disease in his lifetime. Then Facebook has the tech to or the people to like squash a story about Denzel voting Trump or Michael Moore voting Trump. Or Hillary killing someone, like all of
So I have a couple other questions before opening it up to the rest of the class. So you joined Stanford about a year ago to do the MSX program. Why did you decide to leave TechCrunch and go back to school?
There was a lot more about so in the media, I was watching media inflate valuations, like with magic. I was watching media, like, I think that many VCs, when they're trying to figure out the worth of a company, just do that, right? And I thought that was frustrating because it was kind of like a P.T. Barnum effect. Like there's a sucker board every minute. You get something at the seed, you put 100K into it, and then you try to inflate it to the next person, and they inflate it. Like it seemed a little bit like a pyramid scheme. But again, two sides. On the one side, the founder was telling this amazing story of the future, and people were buying into that story of the future. And I think the public markets work very much in the same way. But on the other side, I knew that there were equations and math behind valuations for the public companies, and I wanted to see if those existed for private. They don't, or they do only if you have revenue or EBIT. So I wanted to learn the quantitative aspects of what I understood qualitatively, and I thought that Stanford was the best place to do that. And I did it, and it was a really positive experience, and I think I understand a lot more than what I understood before. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's like learning's like a drug, right? You can't really stop. You want to continue, or most people can, but we can't, right? Some people are addicted to learning, and I am one of those people. So,
what are you up to nowadays? I'm sure everyone's asking you that, and everyone's very curious. What are you doing nowadays?
Oh, between us, is this going online or is this just going to?
You can cut out some parts.
Yeah. All right. So I wanted to be an investor while I was at TechCrunch. The optics were bad, so I didn't invest in private companies. I never wanted a founder to be like, "You're invested in my competitor." Like I never wanted to be in that kind of like bad juju situation. So I didn't. But I always, again, loved the idea of telling a story and getting people to believe in your story and getting to support you with their resources and their expertise and their knowledge of an industry. So I want to do that. I want to support startups that I think need to exist with my resources and knowledge and expertise. So I made my first investment in a company called Joy, and I'd like to continue to make investments. And I'm hoping I can do that structurally, so like in a fund, for example. But it's early days, and I think when I started in tech or at TechCrunch, we were all pretty sure that mobile was the next big thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if there's one thing that people are 100% sure about in this day and age. So I'm excited to see what it is, but there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns right now.
Yeah. What do you think is, just as a follow-up question, since I didn't know that's what you were planning to do, what's kind of the transition between journalism and investing? And we've seen a couple folks who've done that very successfully, like Mike from Sequoia as one example, and I guess how do you see that kind of?
And isn't Alsop?
Stuart Alsop at Alsop Lead Partners as well.
I think the transition really is having that critical eye that you use and the filter that you used in figuring out what companies were worth covering and what stories were worth covering, and applying that to the massive inbound that you get every day as an investor. And I view every deck as a story that the founder's trying to say. So either the story compels you or it doesn't. Yeah.
And one more question related to that. I think there's a number of reporters at TechCrunch who've gone on into investing. There might be one firm which has gobbled up most of those reporters. I guess what are your thoughts in terms of kind of like the clear split and kind of like separation between reporters still at TechCrunch and people who've transitioned into investing, and making sure there's no conflict on that side?
So all of the people that I know at TechCrunch, and especially and you remember that culture that I was saying, that people wanted to be excellent, people wanted to have high integrity, mm-hmm. That's part of the culture. So I think people, There was a reporter at another publication that was working for Apple while he was working for the while he was working for the publication. So there was like a month where he was at Apple and also writing about tech at another pub. I don't think that's the kind of thing that would happen at TechCrunch. Like from what I know, every situation where someone has gone from reporting to VC has been above the board. Mm-hmm. But I think that's because of the culture. Like I would be shocked to hear that someone was working at Tech today under Matthew Panzerino, who has amazing integrity. Someone was working at a tech company or at a VC while covering VC at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other questions?
My name is Ryan Nakashima. I'm a Knight Fellow here this year. So related to journalism, I was at the Associated Press before this. So as someone who's worked in the media industry and left, and you described the broken business model, I totally agree. There's problems here. I mean, as an investor now, would you ever invest in a media business?
If it was a media business trying to change the business model to reward accuracy, yeah. But if it actually had a chance, because you can't really say, all right, everybody, we're gonna shut it down. We're gonna shut the system. No more BuzzFeed. We're just done. We're gonna rebuild this like niche site where everything's really accurate and you have to pay $1 million to access it. It's not going to happen. It needs to be something that's viable and wants to change the game.
Have you seen a pitch along those lines, or?
I think there's a lot of opportunity in local news. And I also think there would be a lot of opportunity when, because now we don't know, self-driving cars hit the roads. Because then all of a sudden people will have like a couple hours free to consume something, and it's probably going to be media or social media. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity in local news. That's where I got my start. There's a lot of opportunity in AR, and probably VR. So there's a lot of opportunities in these platforms that are now emerging. But in terms of web and mobile, no, I have not. Other than something like The Information, yeah, and the New York Times and ProPublica, everything that you either subscribe to or pay with donations. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts of kind of where the next successful business model could provide accuracy would come from? And I guess could we learn anything from our British friends? Because I believe that the government does fund the BBC, which I think in my mind does a pretty good job of, relating accurate stories, at least better than a lot of our clickbait. I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love the BBC. I think, unfortunately, in our current regime, that would be Breitbart. So I don't know. I have a couple thoughts. One thing that I was debating doing while I was thinking about leaving TechCrunch was like a Bitcoin-based payment system where you would pay like 10 cents a view. Yeah. So companies wouldn't have to get money from advertisers necessarily. It would like just demolish the CPM model, and so they'd get money directly from the viewers.
So I actually know a few companies in that space that kind of all struggle, partly because the price of Bitcoin transactions has gone up, but do you still think there's hope for that? It doesn't even need to be Bitcoin, it can be Ethereum, or I don't know,
I do. But if Bitcoin or Ethereum has to stabilize, I do. I think, especially now. One of the things that have made me very hopeful in these past few days is that I'm seeing more people subscribe to the New York Times. I'm seeing more people subscribe to the Washington Post. I'm seeing people donate to the ACLU. So it's come to this to get people to pay money for things that they appreciate and respect. But it's a crisis opportunity. Yes, it has to come to having a reality TV star elected president to get you to pay for accurate news. Fine, but we had to hit rock bottom before we're gonna end.
That's how humanity works, though, right?
Yeah. Yes. yeah.
About 2 hours ago, I saw a pretty dynamite talk on advanced cybersecurity research. And what does that do for someone like you? Meaning, does it make your job of getting honest journalism not easier or harder? And can you help the cybersecurity guys do their job?
I mean, it depends. Someone like me as an investor, or someone like me as in my old role as a reporter or as an editor?
I'm a public policy.
So
For the good of it.
I think cybersecurity is another one of those areas that doesn't get as much coverage as it should. I just was reading in the New York Times, which I would gladly pay like 1 Ethereum to for this article, about how some Chinese company that wasn't named was installing malware in some phones that just revealed the user's text messages and locations and their call, and they were sending it back to a server in China. So I think there is more room for more coverage of cybersecurity in tech news, absolutely. We just need to get it to a point where we make sure that the fear of threat in like mom and pop in Orange County is real. Because here's a fun story. I woke up last week to a message of my friend being like, I hate to tell you, someone I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, I hate to tell you this, but you've been hacked. And this is a friend that is in the hacker circles. And I'm like, what do you mean I've been hacked? And he didn't respond. So for an hour, I'm sitting there like putting 2-factor into everything and like changing all my passwords. Like never tell someone you've been hacked and then don't respond. And I felt like Jennifer Lawrence or something. I'm like, oh no, so bad. But like as a tech reporter, I hadn't put in 2-factor on my Gmail. I'm ridiculous. Now I have 2-factor. If you're out there looking to hack me, good luck. And then an hour he responds and he's like, yeah, someone posted something on your Facebook page, then it's gone. And I think I had logged into one of those Wi-Fis, like in Bloomingdale's or something, which is like using a public restroom. Don't use public Wi-Fi. And that thing had posted something to my Facebook and then it just disappeared. But so it's not as bad as like my Gmail being hacked or my Dropbox being hacked, but it's still kind of gross. So I think there's a lot of ignorance about cybersecurity. I think it needs to be covered better. I think it needs to be covered in English. Yeah. You're welcome.
Going back to like China kind of shifting over to like media and censorship. I'm writing a paper on social media censorship right now, and so it's interesting. Like all the companies who say they aren't media companies, they have to kind of rethink their like content policies. How do you think their reshaping of content policies will affect like all their users, like freedom of expression?
Isn't the statistic like 63% or 65% of the world lives in a place where their social media is censored?
Yeah.
So we've come to a point in the 21st century that we are a minority that we have free speech. So I think we really need to think about that, and all the companies that are based here to take that as something to uphold. And so it's going to be one of those, like with the Facebook napalm girl, it's going to be one of those case-by-case basis things. You can't just say no nudity and then like ban Pulitzer Prize-winning photographs that talked about horrors committed by generations past. So it's going to be humans, and it's going to be case-by-case basis, and it's going to be a lot of respect towards the freedom of speech that we are very lucky to have in the U.S.
With regards to startup press releases, I was wondering, in TechCrunch, I was wondering what percentage of the leads come from VCs as opposed to the founders.
So you're not supposed to reveal sources. It's like rule 1. But I think leads come from everyone in the community. I can kind of answer your question this way. If we like other humans go on social proof, so if a company is backed by some famous VC, we're more likely to be like, oh, like I'll take a second look. Like it's almost like when you read Andreessen or Sequoia backs a grilled cheese company. You're like, oh, I wonder what's interesting about this grilled cheese company. Maybe I should cover it. Maybe it has tech. Maybe it's like tech cheese. So that's my answer. Yes, all of tech from founders to VCs to PR people to marketing people. There's a conversation going on with press, and we're interacting with all parts of the company and all parts of the supply chain. Yeah.
And what about founders who hire PR firms?
I think I think some PR firms are very useful. I think the PR firms that do things like get you on Good Morning America are pretty useful. I know a founder who has an agency, like a talent agency. So I think if you're doing something that needs moms on board or mainstream US on board, I think there's certain agencies that are very useful. That being said, me personally, I like to, for the most part, with the exception of like 10 PR people that Aaron's the most is one of them, Brandy Barker is another, Brew is another. There's a couple of PR people that are thought leaders that I love interacting with because they're good communicators and they give me a good sense of the space. Mm-hmm. Aside from those people, at the seed stage, at an early stage, I'd much rather have the founder of Word Lens write in and say, hey, this is my cool app. It can translate languages. This is the future. Mm-hmm. Like, will you write about me? It's more of an authentic experience because it doesn't feel mediated. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned that founders shouldn't do PR just for PR's sake. Like, it should be more strategic and timed well. And so a lot of it seems to be kind of common sense about when to reach out. But what do you suggest or recommend to like founders or early stage teams about learning, getting educated about the basics of PR strategy?
Read Aaron Zamoss' article. Brooke Hammerling has written something for first round review about press strategy. There's a couple, I think even the Information might have written something. There's a couple of publications that have covered this that are actually like interesting and enlightening about how the whole thing works. So just read trusted sources, and then probably ask your other founder friends that you think are doing it right. Like if you're in YC and you have a founder friend that you think has done an amazing job with media, like talk to them. YC or what's StartX, like 500 startups. If you're in an incubator, or if you're at like in Stanford Venture Studio, ask your friends because they've probably been there before or ask me. Like, yeah.
So we're in a stage where there's a pretty big lack of diversity in the tech industry, and part of the reason why minorities don't go into the field is because they can't see themselves as a contributing member of the tech industry. So I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on media's role in this issue and maybe closing the gender diversity gap?
I have a lot of thoughts on this. This is another thing that I'm proud of at TechCrunch. I think because when I joined, we didn't talk about it at all. And I think one of the things that I did was I talked about it, and I talked about it a lot, and I talked about it in a kind of aggressive way, which you're not supposed to do as a woman, but oops. But I was really adamant about it because and this is a very long conversation with me, especially now. I wasn't raised to think that I was different from other people. I really wasn't. I guess I was raised by wolves because I didn't really feel like being a woman would be a disadvantage until I got out of college. And when I got out of college, I realized that, yeah, I was. And unless I did something to change it, it wasn't going to change. Or unless I was vocal about it, it wasn't going to change. But I kind of was like, spent 21 years in this idyllic abyss of gender equality and racial equality. Like, I grew up in Greece, it's a different thing. And then it hit me that, wow, like, I'm discounted. That sucks. Like, I'm a discounted person in society. And I have seen so much progress from other people who felt like they were discounted. I'm sure that we can see this progress in my lifetime. That's what I wanted to see. I was very inspired by Hillary Clinton back in the 90s saying that she wasn't going to bake cookies. And so I'm like, maybe I'm not going to bake cookies. Like, I'm not going to stand down. And I think it's kind of the same same thing for tech as it is for the world right now. We just saw a woman lose the presidency, in my opinion, because many people are sexist, because many people are discriminatory, because she was held to a different standard, because society's expectations for women are structured in a certain way, it kind of made it impossible for her to be likable. I think that Trump won because he had a more charismatic personality. I'm not saying that in a good way. And I think women aren't allowed to do that. So when you're a woman, you're in public, you can't be charismatic because you're flirting. If you're like serious, you're too serious. Like you can't win. And so what you're talking about is like you can't be what you can't see. It's gonna take, for tech to be a more diverse place, it's gonna take 1,000 mercenaries. It's gonna take 1,000 Erica Joys at Slack. It's gonna take 1,000 women, or any minority, taking that step, even though it's painful, and then taking another step and taking another step until the glass ceiling cracks. But it's close to cracking, I hope. And I hope, even though Hillary lost, that we get over ourselves and eventually elect a woman. We didn't think, there were people who never thought we'd have a black president. And I wrote down on a card, if Obama can do it, you can do it. If Obama can be a leader, you can be a leader, Alexia. So it's that kind of thing. You have to watch or Kamala Harris now. You have to watch other people do it and say, all right, if they can do it, I can do it. If Sheryl Sandberg can do it, I can do it. If Padma Shri Warrior can do it, I can do it. If Diane Green can do it, I can do it. And you just have to keep doing that until there's critical mass. That's my thoughts. Otherwise, we're just going to be afraid and not show other women that we're here.
Other questions? So I think we're actually out of time. Final question.
So how do you feel about the benefits and drawbacks of the trend towards sponsored content? Or is it mostly drawbacks?
I think the big benefit is that it supports people writing about things that are in jest or things that are informational. The big benefit is that it supports writers. That it makes publications that are actually real publications with standards about journalism. It keeps them in business. The drawbacks are that it's pretty easy to get fooled by a fake article or by a sponsored article. That's why people pay for them, because it's easy to be fooled by them. And I don't think that's good. I don't think that's good for the world. That being said, there's companies I think Snapchat's doing a very good job of innovating on the advertising model. When you look at the filters, and there's a filter for MAC makeup, or there's a filter for Taco Bell. That's one way that native ads kind of works. I think a native ad that fools someone into thinking that it's a real story about a real thing, I think that's bad news. Literally bad news.
Cool. Thank you.